All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you've had a good week so far. I'm sorry for a minute late. I just learned a valuable lesson, which is don't call a constituent back within 25 minutes of having to start a committee meeting, because you might not get to that meeting on time. But we are here. J'espère que tout le monde a passé un bon quelques jours chez vous dans
I hope you had a good few days in your riding.
of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Just a reminder for colleagues as well as our witnesses that you've got these headpieces here which are meant to help you with your translation. If they're not plugged in, they can be wherever, but if they're plugged in and not on your ear, we just ask that you place them on the stickers in front of you. That is done to protect the health, safety, and well-being of our interpreters who work very hard on our behalf. So, colleagues, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, we adopted a motion very recently on September 22nd to talk about the study of Canada's industrial defence strategy, and this will mark our very first meeting in that regard. We had a good conversation about productivity last week. So we've got a couple of officials here with us today. From the Department of Industry, Kendall Hembroff, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, who joins us by video conference, as well as from the Department of National Defence, Wendy Hadwin, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Policy Industry, and Major General Jeff Smith, Chief of Air and Space Force Development from the Royal Canadian Air Force. I believe that Madame Hadwin and Hembroff are each speaking on behalf of their respective departments, so we'll allocate upwards of 5 minutes to you both in whichever language of your choice, and then we will begin with a line of questioning from members of Parliament around the table, starting with the Conservatives, and then we'll rotate. Since we do have members of the armed forces here, both in uniform and civilian, I just want to take an opportunity, both on behalf of myself as a member of Parliament, and I think everyone around this table, for thanking you very much for your service to our country. With that, I will pass the floor over to Kendall Hembroff for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm very sorry that I'm not here this afternoon with all of you in person, but unfortunately I had a mishap a few weeks ago and I'm on crutches. I'm nevertheless very happy to be able to talk to you about the views of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada concerning a defence industrial strategy. Planned defence spending represents a generational opportunity to invest in Canada's defence industry and economy at a time when many of Canada's manufacturing sectors are facing unprecedented challenges. In 2022, the Canadian defence industry was comprised of over 620 firms, which contributed over $9.6 billion in GDP and 81,200 jobs to the Canadian economy. Canada's defence industry is at the cutting edge of technology development, and our defence sector is a driver of innovation, investing at more than 3 times the research and development intensity of Canada's manufacturing sector. Beyond world-leading capabilities in the design and manufacturing of commercial aircraft, Canada also has strong capabilities in maintenance, repair and overhaul, training and simulation systems, unmanned aerial systems, Earth observation, space robotics, combat ground vehicles, munitions, shipbuilding, sonar technologies, and more. Canada also has established and emerging capabilities in dual-use areas like artificial intelligence, cyber, quantum, biomanufacturing, and critical minerals. Comme vous le savez, le gouvernement s'est engagé.
As you know, the government has committed to publishing a defense industrial strategy later this year. It will be aimed at strengthening our domestic industrial capacity to meet the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces and those of our allies.
Notre objectif.
Our goal is to reduce Canada's long-standing dependence on foreign suppliers by leveraging Canada's traditional defense, commercial, and dual-use strengths to support CAF requirements where feasible. This will require focused investment in key defense industrial priorities, as well as ensuring that federal procurements are leveraged to strengthen industrial capacity through various tools. Canada's domestic market is quite small. That is why we are also committed to ensuring that we create an industry that is also well positioned for export opportunities.
This industrial strategy has not yet been finalized, but ISED and the Department of National Defense are working together to advance this work. More details will be forthcoming in the coming months. But in the meantime, Chair, I'm happy to talk about some of the existing building blocks for a more comprehensive strategy. ISED is well positioned to play a leading role in the development and implementation of the DIS, and the Minister of Industry has publicly discussed her vision for the strategy using a framework of buy, build, and partner. This means leveraging the government's purchasing power to create benefits throughout the supply chain, building up Canada's industrial capacity in key areas, and developing strategic collaboration with international allies. As you may know, ISED has housed various programs since the late 1950s that have funded companies for civil and defense activities. Today, ISED has a number of programs, such as the Strategic Response Fund, Innovative Solutions Canada, and our Global Innovation Clusters, which support the development and commercialization of technologies across the industrial economy, including defense. There are opportunities to leverage existing innovation programs in the short term to get funds out quickly to Canadian industry. Also within my department's portfolio, the National Research Council is a key partner for Canadian industry, helping bridge new technologies to market through programs such as the Industrial Research Assistance Program. We are examining ways that the NRC, with its world-class testing and research facilities, can play a greater role in supporting defense. I would also note the role that regional development agencies can play in supporting the development and integration of businesses, mainly SMEs, into defense supply chains. Our toolbox includes the National Shipbuilding Strategy, which since 2010 has been helping to restore our shipyards, rebuild our marine industry, and create sustainable jobs in Canada. And Canada also has an offset policy, the Industrial and Technological Benefits Policy, or ITB for short. The ITB policy requires that a firm awarded an eligible defense or Canadian Coast Guard contract to undertake business activity in Canada equal to the value of contract, and it's estimated to contribute approximately $4.7 billion to Canada's GDP and over 40,000 jobs annually in Canada. Many of the most successful defense, aerospace, and marine firms operating in Canada have benefited from the policy, including companies such as CAE, MDA Space, Haro DevTech, IMP, PAL Aerospace, and Genoa Design. The last point that I'd like to make is that a defense industrial strategy must include procurement, which is our most powerful tool. Canadian defense firms have indicated that the number one thing that the government can do to support their growth is for the Canadian Armed Forces to purchase from Canadian industry. So we're reviewing ways to improve the procurement process and ensure that Canadian industry is engaged early on. In closing, and before I turn it over to my colleague Wendy, the forthcoming defense industrial strategy will ensure that our historic investments are focusing on building and sustaining Canada's defense industrial base to meet the needs of CAF and our allies while driving economic growth, resilience, and innovation across the broader Canadian economy. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Hembroff. Appreciate that. Ms. Hadwin, turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today about the Defence Industrial Strategy. I want to begin by acknowledging we're meeting on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe people. Against the backdrop of yesterday being the Day of Reconciliation, I want to just say that my team's commitment to reconciliation and strengthening relationships with Indigenous communities is a big part of the work that we're doing at National Defence on a defence industrial strategy. We have a unique moment to embed collaboration with Indigenous communities in from the start. We have forums, for example, the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee, to work together to plan for equipping the Canadian Armed Forces with greater reach, mobility, and capacity to operate in the North, to improve access to key defence supply chain resources while also bringing benefits to Indigenous communities. Let me take you back to the beginning. Il y a près d'un an, j'ai commencé à...
Almost a year ago, I started in a new role at the Department of National Defense as the Assistant Deputy Minister of Policy and Industry. Our Deputy Minister created this role in order to lead the entire defense team in a coordinated effort to develop a defense industrial strategy for all of Canada. One of my very close partners in this work is Major General Jeff Smith, Chief of Air and Space Force Development.
Major General Smith has joined me in case you have questions about what capabilities the Canadian Armed Forces may need and how their requirements get set. I also work closely with many colleagues in the Canadian Armed Forces, principally those charged with force development. As you can see, this is already a whole-of-defense effort that requires the expertise of both our military and civilian members. From a policy perspective, we work with colleagues from across the public service, but most closely with Kendall and her team at ISED to prepare advice for the entire government on a Canadian defense industrial strategy. Je veux vous remercier, cette comité, d'avoir entrepris les...
I wish to thank this committee for undertaking this study at a very important time for Canada, because the threat environment is intensifying and we are witness to a rupture in the economic structures and partnerships that have underpinned our approach in the past and which we may have taken for granted. Perhaps the starting question today is this: why should Canada need or want a defense industrial strategy?
We want to do this work. We think it's an opportunity to bring coherence to defense spending, which, by any measure, is a massive amount of money. Last year's defense policy, Our North Strong and Free, committed to the development of a defense industrial policy for just this reason. However, in one short year, things have changed drastically. And the Prime Minister has just recently committed Canada to investing 2% of our GDP in defense. This year, that means an additional $9 billion. The rationale for the DIS is therefore all the more important. I'm going to use the short form DIS, if that's okay with you. This strategy can, we believe, explain how defense spending will intersect with the Canadian economy and how the results will accrue to Canadians in terms of the defense of Canada and our shared national security. We believe the DIS will help establish a renewed and more dynamic relationship between industry and the defense team, not just the Canadian Armed Forces, but also the civilians who support them and other members of the defense family, the Canadian Coast Guard, for example, and the Communications Security Establishment. The DIS will help us access industrial capabilities we need to meet the threats of today and the threats we see coming. As you are aware, our adversaries, North Korea, Iran, Russia, the People's Republic of China, are aggressively scaling their military-industrial ecosystems, and they have our Western alliance in their sights. In response, Canada and our allies are rearming, reshoring, and racing to secure access to next-generation defense technologies. We have been guided by a sense of urgency as we think about three priorities for the DIS. One, strengthening the Canadian industrial base, as Kendall described, and ensuring secure access to the capabilities we need to defend Canada. Enhancing the resilience of the Canadian economy by aligning defense investments with national industrial strength. And most importantly, safeguarding our national sovereignty. These priorities have come to us out of a lot of effort over the past 10 months. Let me tell you what that looked like. Benchmarking. We undertook an analysis of a few areas essential. We conducted an in-depth analysis of defense industrial strategies of more than 15 allies and partners. Of course, we found them on the internet. But we also interviewed the authors and met with them, our defense attachés and our policy people with all of these 15. We are not above stealing a good idea. We began speaking with industry about what they imagine a DIS could entail. Through many more engagements than I can count, we have learned a lot about the expectations that are out there in this country, and they are high. We put this together and we did some analysis, and we saw some important things. We went about understanding how is access to capital a barrier to industries operating in this sector. We began looking at the role of supply chain in defense industries. We also looked at the unique advantages of some parts of Canada's sectors, for example, quantum. We have a unique ecosystem here, and it represents an advantage. There are some other areas, like defense exports. Un sujet qui revient souvent.
A subject that comes back often is the importance of communication and collaboration between the government, the armed forces, and the industry. We have had the exceptional opportunity with this strategy to create strategic partnerships. You may have noticed the announcement of some early examples, such as next-generation aircraft maintenance and pilot training. Another point, and I will soon conclude my remarks, was regarding the many advantages within Canadian industry. We have renowned researchers at major universities and research institutes, cutting-edge innovation in quantum and artificial intelligence, as well as key resource reserves.
Strategy would be to optimize the way that all of these advantages exist in this country towards an objective that aligns with the defense of Canada. Nos alliés sont très habiles pour trouver.
Our allies are very adept at finding and obtaining what they need to defend themselves. We have the opportunity to do the same.
Across our many government departments, programs, and agencies already exist to support industry, and Kendall has been through some of that list already. I will simply conclude by saying that our goal for the Defence Industrial Strategy is straightforward. We want to ensure that the Government of Canada has secure, timely, and reliable access to the capabilities we need to defend the country, protect national sovereignty, and meet current and future threats. In doing so, we expect that we will remain responsible stewards of public funds and be able to help Canada's industrial ecosystem. Our teams are looking very much forward to following your study and to incorporating some of what you learn as we develop the DIS. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to begin our first round of questions, which will be 6 minutes allotted to members of each party. Mr. Falk, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony here this afternoon. Very interesting. I think it was Ms. Hembroff that indicated that we have 600 plus firms in our industrial complex that are supplying the defense industry, and yet they only supply about half of all of our purchases for our Department of National Defense. When you talk to the suppliers that we have in supplying our defense industry, what would be their two top frustrations in dealing with national defense?
Mr. Chair, I guess I would say overwhelmingly, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, what Canadian defense companies are looking for is the opportunity to compete successfully in federal procurement processes. So I really do think that that requires a culture change in terms of how we approach procurement. It may mean looking at new and innovative procurement approaches. For example, that may mean looking, for example, more at strategic partnerships or direct procurements with Canadian companies that have leading capability. But I would also say that overwhelmingly, Canadian companies have also told us that, you know, they're looking for opportunities to be able to work within a broader Canadian supply chain. So we are looking for leading companies in the defense ecosystem, whether they are Canadian companies or foreign companies with a major Canadian presence, but to be able to work very closely with Canadian companies in the supply chain.
Okay, and when they tell you that, what do you think they mean? They're not being able to work closely enough with.
Well, so I would say, for example, when you look at when you look at companies, overwhelmingly, I would say the majority of Canadian defense firms are small and medium-sized enterprises. So they depend very heavily on things like the industrial and technological benefits policy, which drives investment into different parts of the supply chain. I would say that they are also keen to be able to partner with larger firms and to be able to work together in bringing forward solutions. I mean, overwhelmingly, what they're looking for is the opportunity to put forward made in Canada solutions as part of the procurement process.
Okay. I'd ask Ms. Hadwin a question as well. You had indicated that currently there's a rupture in our system. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Thank you for the question. I think it was the Prime Minister's remarks I was trying to recall concerning a rupture in the trade and economic relationships that we have enjoyed in the past.
Okay. And you also talked about procurement a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about what our suppliers are telling you about our procurement policies?
In all of the defense industrial strategies we've looked at, procurement is an essential piece of how governments orient themselves to support industry better. This government has announced the intention to create a defense procurement agency, and I'm not a procurement professional myself. I'm just a policy person, but some of the best minds in the public service are working on this exact challenge.
So then when it comes to policy for procurement, do we have a buy Canadian advantage in our tendering process? Is it a weighted system that would give more points to a Canadian supplier, manufacturer?
I thank you so much for the question. I can't help but want to refer this to Kendall.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the government announced actually just a few weeks ago that they would be introducing a new Buy Canadian policy to the federal procurement process. This will apply to defense and other sectors, and so more information will be provided within the coming months in terms of exactly how this Buy Canadian policy operates in practice. But the answer to your question is that currently we do not have a procurement regime that prioritizes Canadian solutions.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And along the lines of procurement, again, I just, had an experience in my office here on the Hill recently. We've got a bubble in our carpet, which we've had for a couple of years, and we've been trying to get that addressed. And so we've had about 9 or 10 different visits from Public Works Canada or the House of Commons maintenance people to try and address a simple thing like a roll in the carpet that needs to be fixed. And it's still not resolved. This has been going on for over a year. Is that a frustration we have in our procurement at national defense? Like, can we not get anything done without having 10 visits with half a dozen people each time, or 4 to 6 people come to look at a problem?
Mr. Falk, I hate to burst your bubble, but we've got about 20 seconds left here. I'm not sure who the question was for.
I would direct that to Mrs. Hembroff again.
Okay, sure. Ms. Hembroff, about 30 seconds, please.
Sorry, Chair, could the question just be repeated?
How many visits does it take to get something done through procurement? How many proposals? How many meetings have to be had? Is it like, we've talked about F-35s for I don't know how many years and studied it, and nothing ever happens.
So, Mr. Chair, I don't think that I can answer that. I certainly don't have any data in terms of what the average time is that takes for procurement from start to finish, and every procurement is very different. But it's very possible that the Department of PSPC might have some data on that front.
Okay, thank you very much. Madame O'Rourke, à vous 6 minutes.
Ms. O'Rourke, 6 minutes to you. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Hadwin, this is a really exciting time in terms of our economy, our sovereignty, reconciliation, equipping our servicemen and women with made in Canada solutions properly and fit for the threats that we're seeing today. So I'm very excited. I'm wondering if you want to give us a picture of the range of things that the defense industrial strategy will be looking at, because the quick description talks about, everything from quantum to food to, AI. So all of these things. Can you give us a sense of what the landscape looks like?
Thank you so much for the question. I think the simplest way to start is whatever the Canadian Armed Forces need to do the job the government is going to ask of them is therefore a capacity that we would like to have access to in Canada preferentially. And that's where we start from. So it is everything from food all the way to high-tech equipment. The strategy, though, if you think about it, the way we've gone about it is to identify where we think there are structural gaps that prevent us from thinking about the conflicts of the future and the capabilities we're going to need. In this respect, we know that deep tech, AI, quantum, robotics, unmanned systems, all of these will be part of any sort of military requirement that we foresee. But we also know there are some structural barriers for industry to be able to work with the Canadian Armed Forces. Some of those include small businesses struggling for access to capital because they are operating in the defense sector, or because they are making something that might cause harm in a military conflict. Some of the questions that we get asked a lot by industry, or some of the frustrations we hear, are who do you talk to? Some industries we've heard of come to Ottawa and meet a lot of different, respectfully, assistant deputy ministers like me, and they don't feel like they understand how they can get their problem solved or translate into a contract. We know that we want to position Canada to articulate what would be some sovereign capabilities, things where we would want to have them be Canadian from start to finish, where we would want to have the ability to draw on this capability. Also because we're very good at it, but because it's essential in wartime. We have a shipbuilding strategy which represents a sovereign capability, but there might be opportunities for other things you can imagine. I'll just conclude with one more area which is so important, and that is research and development and the commercialization of technologies and capabilities, from landing gear systems all the way through to data integration. We have so many great and talented firms in Canada, but we have some opportunities to improve how they orient to a defense demand signal.
Thank you very much. So a quick question on procurement, and then if I have time, then I want to go to IP and ethics. But there is a company in Guelph, woman-owned, and she actually makes some pieces for export, machining parts for American tanks, right? The U.S. has a stream for small businesses, and they also have a stream for women-owned businesses. So smaller contracts, there's a pool of those contracts, and then it's easier for those small businesses to bid. The UK has a defense industrial strategy. They also have a stream dedicated for small business. Is our defense industrial strategy planning on doing that, or will we be relying on the large industries, like the large defense companies, to be doing their own subcontracting? So I think it's an interesting model, and I'm curious if we are planning on adopting a similar one.
Thank you so much for the question. As Kendall mentioned, and I might just ask her to add to this, so much of the Canadian economy is small businesses, and didn't we learn in the pandemic the way that they can pivot so quickly, but also that they're very vulnerable in times of economic disruption. So we absolutely have our eyes on ways to make sure that we can access the capabilities in the small businesses. And ISED has some programs specifically designed to support them. They are not about defense. So our strategy could consider how to marry up programs that we already know work with small businesses, but open a defense kind of stream. Kendall, do you want to add on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I guess in the case of procurement, We are in the process now of taking a very careful look at the current procurement system, and part of that actually looks at what some of our allies are doing. So I note the examples that have been provided by the member concerning the UK and the US, and actually I think they're quite interesting examples. The Defense Industrial Strategy is still under development. That work has not yet been finalized, but we are certainly looking at other leading examples by other countries.
Great, thank you. And since am I out of time?
You've got a brief amount of time, but it's not going to give us much to lead to a response, Madame O'Rourke, unfortunately. I'll try to roll it over if I can.
Our colleagues will ask the questions.
Monsieur Saint-Marie, à vous pour 6 minutes.
Parole pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Saint-Marie for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I'll be able to use that time, but thank you for being here. Thank you to both the Assistant Deputy Ministers and to Major General Smith for answering our questions. Firstly, regarding procurement. So when it comes to maintaining equipment and technology coming from the United States, we saw the American president start blocking exports at times. For example, with Colombia, there were some motor parts that were blocked, and he said you just have to buy American parts instead. We saw the president block $400 million in exports from Taiwan because he's currently in negotiations with China. So the American president wanted to also put pressure on Canada to block certain replacement parts and certain technology. So when we have such uncertainty as this, when you analyze the risk, what can you tell us about our dependence on the Americans, and what is our contingency plan for the Department of National Defense? Thank you.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, may I answer in English?
So if I understand the question correctly, what analysis have we done about ensuring that we have access to the capabilities that we need, if I could paraphrase it that way? And I will say we have to keep in mind very much that for things like fighter aircraft or other really high-tech capabilities, there are very few countries in the world that actually do that type of production. And so I think Canada made a strategic choice in the 50s to no longer produce fighter aircraft. And so the challenge that we're up against is countries that have invested over decades to develop those types of capabilities. We don't have a simple way to build that industry in Canada really quickly. So this will take time and a lot of funding and support from government to get us to a level where we don't have to depend on other countries for that type of technology. The threat that we are up against on a daily basis is extremely high tech, and this isn't as simple as it might have been in World War II, where we took an automotive factory and started producing bomber aircraft. So when we get to the level of complexity in the weapon systems, the ecosystem that needs to support that is extremely important. And so to speak more specifically to the question, as part of our assessment of, and this isn't just the Department of Defense, this is also with PSPC and ISED, when we do a competition for a capability, we look at the supportability as part of how that assessment is done. So while there may be a desire to keep everything within Canada, we have incredibly advanced industry in many areas. Supporting aircraft is one of those things where we have great industry abilities, but we still don't have all of the capabilities we need to meet our operational requirements indigenously to Canada, if I could say that. So therefore, we are reliant on other countries in many cases to build some of the equipment that we need. So maybe the way to finish that is just to say we are very much aware of that, and we factor that into how we build our requirements and our procurements.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Next question will probably be more for Ms. Hembroff, who's online. I would like to discuss the importance, a little bit the opposite of the topic we just discussed. So the importance for industries in Canada of military exports toward the States. So when we talk about exports from Canada to the United States, what importance is the role that they play in Canadian industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the United States certainly represents a significant market for Canadian exports of defense goods and services. It represents currently 63% of Canada's total exports from the sector. Just to give you a sense of some of our other major export markets, Europe represents 11% and the UK 5%. So for that reason, by necessity, diversification of export markets will need to be something that we look at very carefully in the context of the defense industrial strategy, because we need to make sure that we are providing international market opportunities for Canadian companies, especially given that the Canadian market, by comparison to a lot of other international markets, is quite small. And so in order to really build a very long-term sustainable industry, we need to be also looking at international opportunities.
Is my time up? Thank you very much, Chair.
Mary. Okay, colleagues, into the second round. So 5 minutes each. Mr. Gugelmin, the floor is yours for 5.
Thank you, Chair. General Smith, first, thank you for your service, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. General, the federal government's review of the F-35 procurement has been repeatedly delayed despite public commitments to do so by the end of summer. Would you agree that such delays risk undermining both industry trust and the timely delivery of critical military capabilities?
So I will say briefly that the review process is ongoing, and of course, from an RCAF perspective, we're very much looking forward to the outcome as soon as that decision is made.
The Auditor General's report also flagged a near 50% cost increase, now totaling $27.7 billion. Would you agree that without stronger cost controls and more transparent oversight, these escalating expenses could become a challenge in defense procurement?
So I will say very generally that the level of technology that we're looking at to be competitive and to be able to fight and win against the threats that we are facing is not something that you can buy off the shelf at a Walmart. And I think we all agree that everything is more expensive given recent events within the economy. So cost growth within complex problems is something that has always been the case and will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. So certainly when we look at the military threat that Canada is up against, we have to ensure that we can fill our capability gaps to defend Canadians as directed by the government and as basically in accordance with the government policies that we're given.
So, General, for my career, I spent in the private sector in the steel industry, where there's a lot of timelines and accountability. And just curious if future defense procurement should include more rigorous timelines to improve that sort of accountability that would be required with the public use of funds.
Sorry, was that question for me again?
Yes. Yes, sir.
So I will say, as I'm now in my 37th year of service, and I don't think we have ever delivered anything quickly enough for the demands of the soldiers, sailors, and aviators that are out there and their lives depend on a daily basis. Now, of course, we'd love to do everything faster, but our ability to balance requirements with industry capabilities or good stewardship of public funds obviously have to be balanced within the process that we have. So, of course, we'd always like to go faster, but we want to make sure that we're doing so to make sure that we meet our requirements and provide maximum benefit to Canadians.
So, Major General, from your perspective, with delays and ongoing costs that continually escalate, what do they say about the government's ability to manage complex defense procurement? And how would you say this uncertainty impacts defense industry's planning and confidence?
Yeah, so thanks for that. My perspective is on that is that this is within PSPC's kind of area of expertise. In many ways, I am the requirements guy, and like I said, I would love to have equipment as fast as possible. But that's one where I don't think I have the expertise to be able to answer your question sufficiently.
Another question for you, General. Just from your experience, in your view, what are some of the fundamental flaws in the current system that continue to drive cost overruns and delays? And are there any specific reforms you would recommend to truly fix some of the longstanding issues that you've seen?
So certainly our ability to equip industry with the security clearances that are required to address the threat. And so if I can maybe answer it in a different way. As I said, it's an extremely high-tech threat that adversaries are investing tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions or more dollars into, and it's very agile. And so one of the challenges that we have is we've typically drawn up requirements and then handed them to industry to answer those requirements. And what we're trying to do now, and this is, I think, what Wendy's tried to articulate in the defense industrial strategy as well. From my perspective, we present an operational problem to industry where we can talk about it at the appropriate level of classification and then look for their innovation to help us solve the problem. So to work more collaboratively with industry in full understanding of the threat that we're trying to solve that operational problem. So our ability to work more closely with industry depends on our ability to give them the security clearances that are required to have the infrastructure, both in terms of information technology and physical infrastructure, to protect some of that intelligence information as well as the intellectual property that goes with defining something to defeat it. And so those things are things that we have to improve on so that we can respond in an agile manner to the agility of the threat that we're facing.
Thank you very much. Ms. Khan, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for coming here today and being with us. General, my question will be for you, and if Ms. Hadwin, if you would like to add any comments, I'll be happy to hear that too. So, based on your past deployments, can you identify specific operational challenges that stemmed from limitations in equipment, logistics, or support systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of challenges from deployments. Living conditions are always one, but that's not necessarily an industrial challenge. Our ability to develop and implement weapons that address the threat in a very timely manner is always concerning. And not purely from an industrial perspective, but also what happens when we get it into the hands of our soldiers, sailors, and aviators, to make sure that they're properly trained and able to conduct the operations that they're planned to do. So these things take time, particularly with the level of complexity that we're looking at with some of those weapons. So obviously, you know, the amount of resources that we invest into making that transition as easily as possible for the people who are operating with the weapon systems is very important.
Thank you. Furthermore, could you elaborate how effective Canada's current military plan, Our North Strong and Free, is at addressing these issues in terms of procurement, innovation, and domestic capability deployment?
Okay. I wouldn't necessarily have an opinion on Our North Strong and Free in particular, other than to say that there's a lot of great capability that has been announced that fills capability gaps that we've identified for a very long time. And, you know, In an ideal world, if we can get it from military requirement to fielded capability as quickly as possible, then that would be the ultimate aim for me.
If I could add, I would simply offer that our colleagues in the Department of Public Services and Procurement Canada might be interested to offer some of their perspectives as part of your study. We know that our defense industrial strategy will definitely require a close partnership with that department and the procurement, which I think Kendall referred to as our most important tool. So with the government having announced the creation of a defense procurement agency and the consolidation into a more agile construct, there is every sign of a commitment to solving the procurement challenge. Our job is also to make sure that we're very clear about what it is we need, what problems we're solving, and how industry can help us, because we don't have time to operate in silos.
Thank you very much, Ms. Edwin. So, General, given your leadership role in NORAD capabilities and operational oversight, how have limitations within Canada's defense industrial base, like procurement delays, supply chain constraints, or lack of domestic production in capacity, impacted our military readiness and interoperability with allies?
Sorry, and so I think the way you phrased the question bears a different type of answer. And I would say that, given the relative recency with which the NORAD modernization policy came out after Strong, Secure, Engaged and before Our North Strong and Free, there are a bunch of initiatives that we're moving very rapidly through the procurement system right now. So I don't think it really has impacted our ability to deliver those, again, given the high-tech, complex nature of the operational problems that we're trying to solve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Do I have time? I'll skip. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Saint-Marie, à vous.
Mr. Saint-Marie, over to you. Last summer, on July 10th, Ottawa was getting ready, and the department contributed $100 million for an initiative, and the technical requirements were supposed to guarantee that an American company would be eligible, and the NATO requirements were supposed to be respected. Then the Canadian Index carried out an investigation, and letters were sent to the tribunal to support this CADEX complaint that was submitted. And this reminds me of what happened with the CP-140 Aurora, which when we went with American Boeings instead of the Bombardier that were at the top when it came to the tender. And there would be repercussions for that in Quebec and in Canada. But why does it happen so often like this, that calls for tender have to exclude players from the local economy?
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question.
Encourage.
I would again encourage you to invite our colleagues from Procurement Canada. But I would say that the government's new Buy Canada policy aims at exactly that. So to help us as public servants to award more contracts to Canadians. Of course, there will be special cases where there are special technical requirements, as the Major mentioned, and those will need to be treated differently. Thank you. And a very short second question on another topic. Can you tell us about the importance of strategic mineral reserves and critical mineral reserves for defense in the country's economy, and also the importance for the military industry sector here and for NATO? Why is that important? This is a very, very important opportunity. We are working closely with Natural Resources Canada, which has the mandate to work with critical minerals. There are a certain number of them, and to try to find a way for Canada to take advantage of international markets. Very recently, in June, the Minister of Defense, with NATO counterparts, signed an agreement to continue further work in that area. And we very firmly believe that Canada is in a leadership position because our natural resources are only rivaled by those of Russia and China. Therefore, we are a leader in Western countries and in our Western alliance. There are a great number of opportunities, and we are paying close attention to this. And we also dare to hope, well, we are trying to organize these points in our defense industrial strategy so that we can have mechanisms to ensure that our department, working alongside with ISET and Natural Resources, will be able to continue in that sense.
Merci, Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
You will close off this round with 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for joining us, our deputy ministers, and of course, General Smith and the members of the armed forces. Thank you for your service and your dedication to these efforts in making sure that we can enhance our national defense capabilities. My first question to you, General, is when we invest in our defense, you talked about the technology ecosystem. How important is it to have interoperable capabilities with our allied nations? And how important is that decision making when you're talking about everything from aircraft to ships?
Yes, thank you. So interoperability is one of those issues that we hold it very high in our requirements, I would say. And part of that, if you think back to the foundation of NATO, of which Canada was a founding member, was the ability to define standards which allow us to work easily with our partners. And those types of interoperability standards came as a result of thousands of casualties that the Allies had during World War II. So we've learned and we've paid in blood that we have to be able to work closely with our partners and allies. So when we look at in an air domain perspective, the ability to defend North America, that's something we do very much with the United States through our binational relationship through NORAD. By the same token, when we deploy forces with the NATO force, we have commonality in terms of our doctrine, our training, our equipment, so that our radios can talk to each other, for example, or our data links can share, that critical operational information. So, in short, interoperability is incredibly important for our ability to work with our allies.
Thank you both. Thank you for that. You talked about unsettling lessons, and I want to just go into what we most recently, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how prepared we are as democratic nations. There's an estimated 120 different conflicts around the world at this time. I think this includes the U.S., who, according to Reuters, produced a no NATO standard 115 millimeter munitions from summer 2014 to fall of 2015, the year of Russia's annexing of Crimea, Worse, prior to the invasion, the U.S. military's industrial plan involved sourcing explosives from overseas, including a factory in eastern Ukraine, now Russia-controlled. So what is necessary to provide stability for this kind of defense production in Canada? What should we be looking at? Regulations, potentially demand, production, pollution, those kinds of things?
So I'll say very simply, stability in funding is critically important. And so when it comes to buying weapon systems in Canada, there may be cases where we will need to buy something off the shelf from another country to fill a capability gap that exists right now, at the same time that we invest in the Canadian industry to develop or create the next thing that we might want to replace that with. And so that stability in funding is critical. And we're currently, I can speak for the Royal Canadian Air Force right now. We're currently in a position where most of our aircraft are at the end of their service lives, and we have to buy something now to fill that gap because Canadians expect us to continue to be able to defend. So in some cases, an investment in Canadian industry to help us produce the next kind of weapon system or the next capability that's required, but it may not deliver for 10, 15, or 20 years because of the level of technology that's required in research and development and industrial production capability. Then there's also a requirement in some cases for us to buy something off the shelf from right now. So I would kind of leave it at that from a requirements perspective and maybe pass over to my colleagues if they had anything they wanted to add on the industrial side.
Mr. Chair, I could maybe just briefly jump in, and I would just say, especially given the discussion that's taken place in the last hour, one of the things that we hear a lot from Canadian industry is the need for early engagement to be able to understand the needs of the CAF. That actually does allow for better planning on the part of Canadian businesses that are looking at how they can participate in the Canadian defense market. It also allows programs across the federal government, including programs that I said, to make informed decisions about the types of projects that we fund. So, that type of discussion and triage is really important in terms of making sure that we're effectively marrying up supply and demand.
Thank you. And if I have just a quick, maybe a final little.
Unfortunately, Mr. Baines, that's all the time we've got, and we're already running over. And my apologies, I went to you more quickly than I ought to have, Mr. Googly. Apologies. The floor is yours for final 5 minutes here.
Thank you, Chair. Major General, building on the challenges highlighted with the F-35 procurement, Canada's defence procurement woes are further kind of highlighted by the nearly $1 billion increase to the cost for Navy supply ships, accompanied by significant delays and bureaucratic hurdles. So retired Vice Admiral Mark Norman has bluntly described both the military procurement system and its relationship with the industry as broken, calling for a complete rebuild from first principles. From your experience and perspective, do you agree with that assessment?
So I would say that in any complex system, there's always room for improvement, and we continually strive to improve how we do business on a daily basis.
Ms. Hadwin, how vulnerable is Canada's north to foreign influence when we fail to invest in our own infrastructure? And are you at all concerned that our inaction is leaving room for adversaries to fill the gap, either economically or technologically?
Thank you for the question. I think last year's commission of inquiry into foreign interference illustrated the extent to which our adversaries are attempting to manipulate Canadians all over the country. I am observing as the government launches major projects office and nation-building projects, a huge opportunity for us to get aligned with what we need to do to protect Canada, but also to build Canada. So at the moment, I have a lot of positive impressions about our ability to meet this challenge because we all want the same thing.
Given the significant public funds involved and unfortunately the public's declining trust, what specific, and this is for you, Ms. Hadwin, accountability measures or reforms would you recommend to increase transparency and ensure that defense procurement projects are delivered on time, within budget, and meet both our military and industrial objectives?
Thank you for the question. There are a lot of accountabilities built into each minister who is running a department with a role to play in this space. Because of the urgency of the threat and the sense of, and us having resources now in national defense, we are working extra hard with our colleagues in other government departments to make sure we all row in the same direction, and I would say in the same boat. There is no room for silos at this time. It's not peacetime.
So your recommendation then is just to kind of open up the information sharing between different areas of the department?
Government, thank you for the question, and other government departments. So we have an opportunity to get really good at working together in the service of the defense of Canada.
You also spoke candidly about trust being hard won and lost, and how procurement suffers from a reduction in risk appetite due to past scandals and public complaints. Can you elaborate on what specific structural or cultural changes within the Department of National Defense are needed to rebuild that trust and to improve risk tolerance?
Thank you for the question. I am not in a position to comment on the way procurement is managed or structured or where the trust comes from. I think we are all committed to trying to get the right capabilities in the hands of the Canadian Armed Forces and all those involved in the defense of Canada so that we can meet the moment.
I'll ask you one real quick follow-up. So what concrete steps is the department taking, or should they be taking, to foster a more open, collaborative relationship with the industry?
Thank you for the question. As part of our work on defense industrial strategy, we've come to understand very clearly the appetite in industry to understand what we are doing and what we intend to do next so that they can help meet us there and help us solve problems. So as part of our advice to government, we will be thinking about how can we create spaces. There are already quite a few tables where we sit with industry, but there may be an opportunity for more or to change how those work. Can I give Kendall a chance to speak on this?
We're running very quick on time, but Ms. Hembroff, if we could be quick, that would be great.
Actually, I don't think I have anything to add on this.
Okay, that's as quick as you can get. Appreciate the accommodation. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of the first hour of our meeting. Again, to our witnesses, thank you very much for availing yourselves here today. Major General, again, I just want to say to you directly and to your staff and those members of the Armed Forces, particularly in uniform here today, thank you very much for your service to our country, the sacrifice that you and your family undertake to keep us safe both in the present and in the future. Means everything to our country. So thank you very much for your attendance here today. Colleagues, we're going to suspend briefly and we will return once set up for the second half of the meeting. Going to continue with the second part of our meeting today. We've turned over. We've got three new witnesses that are joining us this hour. So I'd like to welcome appearing as an individual, Professor Ashwin Iyer, who is the Director, Centre for Applied Research in Defence and Dual Use Technologies at the University of Alberta. Welcome. Madeline Redfern, the Chief Operating Officer, Northern Director of Can-Arctic Inuit Networks Incorporated. And from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Heather Exner-Pirot, the Director, Energy, Natural Resources and Environment. Witnesses, you will each have upwards of 5 minutes. I'm typically not strict, but we ran a little bit over time in our introductory remarks in the last session, so if you could time yourselves or just rely on me to give you a little bit of a wave at the 5-minute mark, I'd appreciate that so we can try to make up the time that we've got remaining. I'm going to start with you, Professor Iyer. You have upwards of 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and the members of the committee for the invitation to speak today. As Canada takes historic steps towards a more self-reliant defense industrial strategy, our post-secondary institutions must be considered strategic assets. They provide advanced infrastructure, educate the next generation of innovators, and connect forward-looking research to the practical challenges facing national security and sovereignty across critical defense and dual-use technology sectors, from manufacturing and advanced materials to sensing and navigation to artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Universities are trusted public institutions with deep regional roots. They have the capacity to bring together researchers, industry, and military end users in secure, mission-focused environments. They can rebuild and grow sovereign industrial capabilities, and they can provide the mechanisms to capitalize on procurement opportunities for Canadian businesses in global defense supply chains. Western Canada in particular stands to be a new bastion for national security, serving as both an economic and strategic nexus with vital assets in energy, logistics, advanced manufacturing, and innovation. Its geographic proximity to the Arctic, combined with a vast resource base and deep regional expertise, establishes its preeminence in supporting defense needs in emerging domains such as remote surveillance, uncrewed systems, and cold weather operations. Anchored by advanced infrastructure and resilient supply chains in adjacent sectors such as energy, Western Canada is poised to play a central role in the nation's defense industrial strategy. Alberta features the largest concentration of defense assets in Western Canada. Canadian Forces Base Edmonton is home to 1/3 of the Canadian Army's fighting power. Four-Wing Cold Lake serves as the country's premier fighter training facility, while Canadian Forces Base Suffield contains the world's largest land-based military training area. The Edmonton International Airport will be the western main operating base for the Royal Canadian Air Force's CC-330 Husky fleet and will provide the long-term maintenance of Canada's Leopard 2 main battle tanks. Edmonton's rich defense presence is complemented by Calgary's strong and growing aviation and aerospace ecosystem. These activities are emboldened by a constellation of multinational defense companies. Lockheed Martin Canada, General Dynamics Mission Systems, Arcfield Canada, Kinetic Target Systems Canada, and others have built significant operations in the province. Alberta is also home to several dynamic small and medium-sized businesses situated in and supporting the defense space, including Landing Zones, Canadian UAVs, UVAD, Scope AR, GN Corporations, and Guardian Chemicals. The University of Alberta exemplifies how academic institutions can mobilize regional strengths in support of Canada's defense strategy and economic prosperity. Historically, it was a leading officer training school during both World Wars and established the Khaki University to sustain the education of Canadian soldiers serving overseas during World War I. Today, it continues its defense leadership as a founding member of the Canadian Military, Veteran, and Family Connected Campus Consortium Initiative, and is one of only 2 university-based NATO Diana test centers in Canada. The university is registered in the Contract Security and Controlled Goods programs, ensuring secure infrastructure in compliance with national security requirements. The University of Alberta's Centre for Applied Research in Defence and Dual-Use Technologies, CARDTech, is Canada's sole university-based centre dedicated exclusively to defence and dual-use technology innovation. CARDTech has engaged closely with prime contractors, Canadian and international Tier 1 suppliers, small and medium-sized businesses, and Defence Research and Development Canada, mobilizing over $25 million in R&D projects within Canada's defence ecosystem in the past year alone. What has been achieved at the University of Alberta is the vision for a regional ecosystem where industry and end users, especially the Canadian Armed Forces, are co-located in secure environments for research, development, testing, and evaluation. This model of collaborative innovation provides a template for other post-secondary institutions in Canada, demonstrating how local strengths can be mobilized to meet national defense needs. The approach is strongly aligned with the Government of Canada's recently announced Defense Innovation Secure Hub, or DISH, initiative, positioning universities and regions to accelerate defense technology readiness and commercialization for the country as a whole. Integrated university-housed ecosystems anchored regionally will be vital to the acceleration of national defense readiness, keeping jobs, expertise, and critical technologies within Canadian borders while strengthening local supply chains. Universities provide the foundation for mission-driven research, talent generation pathways, and agile, trusted partnerships needed for Canada to secure its future and meet its international obligations. Mr. Chair, I believe the single most important policy initiative that can unlock the full potential of Canada's universities as strategic partners in building a robust defense industrial strategy is sustained funding for secure research infrastructure, directed to proven university partners with demonstrated success in translating concepts to operational technologies with end users and industry. These universities need dedicated federal investment to build and maintain secure research environments optimally designed for defense innovation. Urgent infrastructure priorities include facilities to simulate and test the resilience of Canadian-made technologies against electronic warfare attacks, labs for developing advanced materials critical for drone and hypersonic platforms, and capacity to nurture a sovereign, secure semiconductor manufacturing sector. Universities serve as the ideal nexus to manage these secure regional hubs, drawing on operational guidance from co-located military and defense industry partners. This approach will expedite the readiness of Canadian-made technologies, strengthening domestic supply chains, and enabling access to global supply chains. In closing, Mr. Chair, I'd like to invite the committee to imagine a future where Canada's security, that vital shield protecting our sovereignty, our people, and our prosperity, is forged in the classrooms, the labs, and the innovation hubs of our universities, where some of our brightest minds turn science fiction into mission-critical technologies, delivering solutions for today's threats while also building capacity for tomorrow's. A future where our universities and their networks are viewed as strategic powerhouses, laser-focused on uniting research, industry, and the military in a single secure ecosystem where concepts become innovations, students become specialists, and the collective capability and sovereignty of Canada's defense industrial base are strengthened. Today, as Canada faces complex global challenges,
Professor Iyer,
recognizing...
I appreciate the picture you're painting, and I hate to cut you off, but we're 90 seconds over. So out of respect to the committee's time, I'm sure colleagues will have questions to send your way that will permit you to expand on that.
Okay.
I'm going to ask Ms. Exner-Perot. The floor will be yours for up to 5 minutes for introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you today. I join you from Washington, D.C., where my think tank was co-organizing an event focused on the G7 Energy and Minerals Summit. We've all noticed how energy and minerals have been, as Minister Hodgson put it in Berlin in August, recentered in Canadian foreign and domestic policy in this past year. Canada is blessed with a tremendous resource endowment, but we've rarely thought of using it in a strategic way. As our adversaries leverage their market dominance in energy and minerals in ways that harm our interests and those of our allies, it is essential that we consider ways that Canada contribute to the security of supply. With regards to critical minerals and the defense supply chain, the NATO alliance has only recently emphasized the issue, putting out a list of defense critical materials last December. The United States has acted with more urgency since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It has made numerous grants, loans, and equity purchases, including through its Defense Production Act, or DPA, under which Canada is considered a domestic supplier. and the USA has made 7 awards in critical mineral mining and processing in the last 2.5 years in Canada, 6 under the Biden administration and 1 under Trump. The main concern that is focusing everyone's attention is this. In the event of a protracted conflict, for example with China over Taiwan, the adversary would have an unacceptable ability to restrict key materials and components needed for the defense supply chain. In a war of attrition, China would surely have the upper hand with its vertically integrated supply chain and ability to simply produce more tanks, more ships, more planes, more munitions, and more drones. We are already seeing in Ukraine how important an adequate supply of defense equipment and supplies are, and how a country such as Russia, with a GDP just the size of Spain's, can leverage its significant defense manufacturing base. Canada's defense industrial base has unfortunately been allowed to atrophy for many years and will take time to build it back up. But we can play a very important role in the alliance in the short and medium term by providing our allies with the raw materials they need to enhance their defense equipment production. Which materials? The list should likely be derived from a cross-reference of minerals and mineral products China has a monopoly on or has put export restrictions on, and the NATO critical raw material list. And there's considerable overlap between those two. In particular, Canada can play a role in bolstering the availability of gallium, germanium, tungsten, titanium, bismuth, and graphite, and some rare earths, and is already a fairly significant producer of cobalt and aluminum. Although it takes a very long time to develop greenfield or new mines in Canada, most of the commodities I just mentioned are things we already produce and refine, or byproducts of things we already produce or refine, or commodities where we have old mines that we could restart production. We can do quite a bit in a few years, not a decade. And this is where industrial strategy comes in. For most of these niche minerals, China has manipulated the market, and there's not a solid business case for private actors to produce these things. I am normally a laissez-faire small c conservative, but in the case of defense materials, the market is not free and is incumbent on the government to step in to secure supply. Canada has committed to dramatically increasing its defense spending, and while procurement takes time, Canada can make some strategic investments in critical mineral production and processing in the short term. And if it were for defense purposes, count it as defense spending. I'll just note that the DPA funding awarded by the United States was matched in Canada through the Natural Resources Canada, not through our Department of Defense. I think it'd be very advantageous to fund, prioritize these projects through the Department of Defense, significantly ramp up the funding, act with urgency, and count it as defense spending. The whole China critical minerals dependency challenge will likely take a decade or more to untangle, but the defense supply chain itself is a relatively small market, and Canada could go some ways towards displacing China. This is an issue Canada should own, take leadership, and help solve for our allies. We don't want to detract from acquiring the assets and systems that we actually need for defense, but we can do a lot with critical minerals in the short term as we ramp up those medium-term pieces. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And in the room with us today, Ms. Redfern, the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes.
So much. For those who don't know me, I'm an Indigenous woman from Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, and I'm involved in the high-tech and innovation sectors of telecommunication, digital, and transportation and energy. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Can-Arctic Inuit Networks, and goal is to build 3,000 kilometers of marine fiber optic cable into Canada's Arctic and interconnect with as many existing or proposed subsea and terrestrial fiber networks. We need redundancy. And of course, I understand and appreciate how interconnected fiber is with satellites. I'm also the CEO of Sedna-Link Marine Systems, and the goal is to put sensors on certain strategic elements of the subsea fiber optic network, effectively allowing sensors to monitor and obtain the necessary marine data with respect to climate change, but also with respect to knowing what is in our marine environment, whether that is submarines or unmanned underwater systems. I'm also the Northern Director of Arctic 360, Canada's only Arctic think tank. Lastly, I wear many hats, as many Northerners do. I am a special advisor to the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories and an Indigenous member on the Nuclear Energy Leadership Table. Our goal is to assist and assess the potential micro and small modular reactors that can provide a full energy solutions in rural, remote, and northern parts of Canada. almost all major infrastructure, including fiber optic cables to ground stations, to data centers, to the over-the-horizon radar system, requires energy. We need it to be stable, reliable, abundant, affordable, and of course, ideally clean. I did forget that I am also a director of the Canadian Arctic Innovation Association, and we published a study on the viability of airships for civilian and commercial purposes that supplements the airship study that was done by D&D. Being able to move large items into Canada's Arctic year-round is a truly transformative initiative that not only would support our communities, but also the military. We know that Canada's Arctic requires investments, and we need the very best long-term technological solutions that support not only our communities, but also our national security objectives, not just now, but also for the next 50 years. A lot of my involvement and interest in these spaces was due, in part, to being mayor for the city of Iqaluit for 2 terms, as well as president of the Nunavut Association of Municipalities, and a member of the Arctic Mayors Forum, which had membership from all across the Arctic nations except Russia. In these various areas and capacities, the discussions have often centered on what is essential or critical infrastructure for our communities and our regions, which has, of course, as I said earlier, been focused around transportation, things like just expanding existing runways or seeing those runways paved so that we can actually see more large or specialized aircraft land in those communities. Increase the size of the airplanes for food delivery, but also allow for Air Force planes to land. We know that in the Arctic there is many intersectionalities and necessity for integration. However, these different layers of governments and various government departments often create silos and, by extension, disconnections and divisions. What I have learned is that at the top infrastructure priorities and requirements of our northern communities also nicely align with what the military want and need. But despite these fragmentations and many non-strategic infrastructure investments that have been made in Canada's Arctic, unfortunately continues on. While we know that we're hearing the Government of Canada speaking about the necessity of dual-purpose and multi-purpose investments, the reality is that almost none of our government departments know how to put this in practice. In fact, when government departments are pitched with true dual-purpose infrastructure, most will state that their departments have no role or responsibility, and I can give you numerous examples, but I'm mindful of time. All this to say is, in closing, is that we recognize how important industry is in being part of the solution, as you also heard, universities, defense, our northern communities, our northern leaders, our Indigenous leaders. The challenge is how do we ensure that as we move forward on determining what strategic investments the Arctic needs, that we actually invest in the right ones with the best outcomes that support not only our local, small s, security at the community level, support our economic development aspirations, but also our big national security objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Redfern. Okay, Madame Danger, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our expert witnesses for being with us today and sharing your time with this committee in this important study. My first few questions will be for Ms. Exner-Perrone concerning your expertise on critical minerals and the role that plays in our defense sector. I think most Canadians understand that we have critical minerals in Canada, but perhaps the appreciation for how very blessed we are relative to other countries is relatively unknown, and we've had governments at all levels who have been opposed to various mining developments and the like, or if they do approve, it takes many years. So for this committee, for the purposes of this committee and looking at a defense industrial policy, could you give us a bit more information on why it is critical that we take our natural resources in the mineral sector seriously and move more quickly to develop those resources?
Yes, thank you for the question. So it's obvious that we're in a geopolitical era that is more marked by conflict and by tension and possible outright conflict. And we see Russia invaded NATO airspace, this week, last week, the week before, and it feels like we are getting closer to conflict. The U.S. Secretary for War just invited all the generals to D.C. to warn them to prepare for war. And how we won wars in the past is by having a better defense manufacturing base, by being able to produce more and outcompete and outlast the competition. And we have, in the last 20 years, very much globalized supply chains, and China has absolutely been strategic in taking advantage of that and dominating some important supply chains that are essential for, they're critical, as we call them. And anyways, we at least need to focus on being able to be independent in our defense manufacturing base, that we cannot allow China, number one, but other adversaries also, to control what we can produce and to hamper that production. So that's why we need to act with some urgency here and to make sure that and not a lot of our NATO allies have the ability to do that, but Canada does.
Thank you. And my understanding is while we have the raw materials, and of course we can do a much better job of ensuring we get them out of the ground, and that's a big asset, what we currently produce and what we could maximize for our allies, we don't put as much emphasis on, we export raw materials, but perhaps not as much efforts on creating the defense things out of those raw materials. Is that an accurate assessment, or are we doing sort of both things well, or overall just your assessment there? Yeah.
It was definitely accurate. I mean, our manufacturing has declined, as has almost every Western country's manufacturing base declined. But Canada has a competitive advantage in raw materials production. We should work with our allies to figure out what part of the process do we hand over materials, how processed, how refined they are, so they can put them into their manufacturing base in the short term. So you can't produce anything if you don't have the raw materials. That is one area where Canada can shine and make sure that it's at a stage where we can hand it over to allies and to their producers, and they can actually put it into materials.
Mm-hmm. And just, can you provide just some basic examples, so perhaps an everyday Canadian that may understand, yes, of course, there's things that go into these defense materials, but can you give us some examples of what Canada has and critical things for our defense procurement that we need, that it creates or contributes to?
Yeah, so quite a few. And I'll mention gallium and germanium because these are things that China has put export restrictions on recently. And they're actually byproducts of things we produce. So if you didn't know, we were big aluminum. I think we all know that now, producers. Gallium is a byproduct of that. And the market for gallium just wasn't very good. China kept prices very low. There was no incentive for anyone to turn that into a product. And so China developed an almost complete monopoly on gallium. Again, the market is very small and niche. It's not a lot of money, but you still need that, component to make things. Same with germanium, is a byproduct of zinc refining, which we do in Trail, BC. But again, the market was so small, there wasn't a lot of private sector incentive to compete with China on it. So it won't take a lot for Canada to, develop the things that we already have and to start processing them, develop the tech and develop the facilities to process them so that we can use it in our own supply chains.
And what sort of products would come out of that?
So, I mean, there's lots of lists. You can see that, the munitions, the materials like tungsten and bismuth that you need to make things hard. Obviously, every component of a battery. A lot of warfare now is being conducted through drones, and you need particular components for batteries for that and all the things that go into a battery, which China has dominated. And then aluminum. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're just building all these things, you need a ton of aluminum. And actually, NATO declares that a critical raw material, even though we're having a hard time finding buyers for our aluminum in Canada right now with the tariffs. But you would hate to lose that capacity because in the event of a conflict, you would need so much aluminum production to keep up.
Thank you very much for those examples. And you mentioned in your opening remarks, there are some, of course, we think of minings that they could take a very long time, certainly in this country, but you did allude to a few things that we could do relatively quickly. I think you mentioned mines that have been shut down formerly and we could reopen. Could you just provide more detail on what we could do in the next, say, 2 years to move in the right direction?
Yeah, so some of it, like germanium and gallium, it's just refining the byproduct that we already have and developing some capacity to do so. For some things like tungsten, antimony, we could do more cobalt, where again, we're already a minor producer and we could just expand the production that we already have. I think the last DPA award was for a tungsten mine in New Brunswick, Sisson mine. And so it's, we know where all these things are. In some cases, they were shut in production in the 80s or 90s because of competition from China. They just became uncompetitive with global commodity prices. And so there are some things that, the resource is still good, the deposit is so good, and we just need to go back in and start producing it and have a price of the commodity where it makes sense for someone to do that. Someone has to buy it at the end of the day.
Much, Madame Dancho. Mr. Bardisi, floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and I'm going to, I have to start 2 questions, one on dual-use technologies, focused on Madeleine Renford and Ashwin Iyer, and then a second question on maybe the objectives of defense industrial policy for Heather Exner-Pirot, and the others can definitely jump in. And I wanted to share my appreciation, Ms. Redfern, for your description of, in the Arctic, a runway is a dual-use technology. And I just wanted to share my appreciation for you sharing that insight. In the earlier panel, we talked about how we have to sometimes buy off-the-shelf technologies for things for which we don't have that capacity yet. But we've also had, I think, a discussion already in this committee about how the technologies that we might need 10 or 15 years from now or the ones that are going to be very important aren't necessarily ones that we could even imagine or might be developing yet. Ms. Redfern and Mr. Iyer, since you're both involved in the front lines of this technological work, what's your advice to us about how to set policy that will allow us to take some bets on some of those more innovative technologies that might not be currently in the mindset of those who are doing the procurement?
So what I could say is and recommend to this committee is that we are very fortunate to have quite a robust, innovative sector in the West Coast and the East Coast with respect to marine technology. However, what my interactions with them is that a lot of their technology hasn't been developed or tested for the Arctic conditions, and as such, they would need some support and funding to be able to do that, because it's very expensive to go to the Arctic. And also, what you ideally want to do is have those companies work with our local northern Indigenous communities, especially our peoples, to build also that capacity. We see, companies or NGOs like Siku Ice, that those partnerships are very, very successful. And with respect to sort of, dual purpose, I'll give you another example. So we're seeing unmanned aviation or drones or underwater unmanned marine sort of similar technology being used for wildlife monitoring, but also can and should be used for monitoring, ships or other submarines or unmanned vehicles in the marine environment that may actually be, foreign incursions that we need to know about and how to respond to.
Thank you.
And I could add to that as well. Our experience as a university is really that our job is to look more forwardly. We're looking at technologies and their evolution over time frames of 5 to 10 to 15 years. And we're always looking for the dual-use counterpart to defense technologies, because this is where we tend to build basic science, and we tend to train our graduate students and build our labs and do our research. So we're always aware and conscious of the dual-use counterparts to defense technologies. A great example from Alberta is we have a very robust drone development ecosystem in Alberta, including Medicine Hat, where we have several small and medium enterprises related to drone production. Many of them are involved in wildfire monitoring and geophysical surveys. The same technology that goes into making drones resilient to those environments are the technologies that are required for defense.
Thank you. Next question to Ms. Exner-Pirot, but the others can definitely jump in too. you could imagine in 10 or 15 years, how will we measure the success or failure of the policy that comes out? Is it company formation? Is it, more women involved in this sector? Is it number of patents? What are some of the ideas that you think we should be focused on in terms of the outputs that we want to be coming out of this over a 10 to 15-year time period?
Great question. So for critical minerals, I'll speak to that. It would be independence in the supply chain, having a very clear line of sight on what are the components that go into all these assets and equipment, and knowing that they are all coming from, the alliance or from allied countries, and not relying on, for example, China or Russia. And knowing what's in your supply chains. Usually you might have line of sight on the first or second layer, but you don't know what your contractors, subcontractors are providing. And right now China is actually in selling some of these materials and components, requiring that companies indicate how they're going to use it, which gives China an excellent line of sight into the Western defense manufacturing kind of ecosystem. But broadly, strategically, why we want to do this is to deter. If we have tremendous defense industrial capacity, if we can outlast and outmatch China and Russia, it will deter them from wanting to go into these, kind of interventionist campaigns, because they won't think that they can win. And that's what we've been able to successfully do for the last 50 or 60 years with NATO spending, with that superior capacity, especially with the Americans, deterring them from even trying. And because we aren't as good on that, because they've caught up, is why I think they feel emboldened, to be more conflictual.
Fortunately, that's all the time allotted, Mr. Pardisi. Monsieur Saint-Marie, à vous pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Saint-Marie for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and greetings to all witnesses. First, I would like to ask questions to Ms. Redfern. So, Ms. Redfern, I'm not sure if you have chosen the channel so that interpreters... Oh, Ms. Redfern. So, thank you very much for participating at the committee here. Thank you for coming to meet with us. First of all, I have a question for you regarding how things work in your region when it comes to relationships between defense and your nation.
So what I can say is that the military or defense has actually done better than some of the other departments in building relationships with our northern communities in particular, because of the northern exercises that they do, and working closely with our Arctic Rangers. And their learned lessons from the mistakes that they've made in the past. Of course, I always suggest that things can be improved upon, and there's a commitment to do so, possibly by expanding the Rangers' roles, the pay, not just a single activity, and also supporting the Junior Rangers, because without a Junior Rangers program, the Arctic Rangers is not sustainable.
Merci beaucoup pour les exemples que vous...
Thank you for the examples that you just gave us. We often hear about the maritime route towards the Arctic Ocean. What are the roles that your nation on your territory can play to support the Department of National Defense as well as the Army?
So what I'm seeing is that our people are definitely interested in learning more skills and having capacity to participate in some of the technological developments. My Inuit organization, the Kekitani Inuit Association, has quite an extensive program on AIS, so that's the Automated Information Systems, and effectively training our people so that they can see what ships are coming into the region, but at the same time also giving them opportunity to go out on the land more, whether that is also for marine monitoring or land animal monitoring, kind of building all those different skill sets. The challenge that I've heard is that so much of it is fragmented, and rather than sort of, a holistic approach, which understands that their skill set is important for defense, but also important for research, important for environment, important for food procurement, and a much more sort of, holistic approach would be much more beneficial.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. During your presentation, you mentioned this topic, but how could there be more economic activity that would benefit your nation on your territory from the National Defense Department, if you would like to build upon what you said during your opening remarks and also what you just discussed?
In part because of the Government of Canada committing billions of dollars for improving national security, along with a 5% set aside for Indigenous procurement, we have seen the creation of a lot more Indigenous companies in this sector. But I do caution and warn that we are also further aware that there's been a lot of fake Indigenous companies. I mean, ISC, which is Indigenous Services Canada, has removed over 1,000, fake Indigenous companies. So what I would say is that ensuring that our companies are truly Indigenous or have, adequate Indigenous participation, it needs to be more than just simply the 51% ownership. There needs to be also, as a Nunavut, a disclosure of how many Inuit are going to participate in the actual project, in what role, as well as how much Inuit training or capacity development is done. So, and a reporting and the possibility of audits, to prove that Inuit or Indigenous people are actually not just tokens, front-facing part of the company, and that because ultimately the purpose of that 5% Indigenous set-aside is to ensure our true participation, and that the wealth, that comes from our involvement is going back to our families, back into our communities, and not just simply a boomerang effect where we levy a tax and all the benefits go to the South.
Merci énormément pour toutes ces réponses. Une dernière question.
Thank you so much for all of those answers. One last question. Have you compared the impact of your nation and what it does for national defense to what Greenland does for its national surveillance and security as a NATO member?
Just very quickly, please, Ms. Redfern.
Very briefly, I mean, the Inuit 4 regional corporations are part of a company called Nasituk, in partnership with ATCO, actually fulfill that. There is a $5 million annual allocation to build up Inuit capacity. I think we can and we should do more.
Thank you very much. Madame Dancho, floor back to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for you, Ms. Redfern, I appreciate your remarks very much, and I'd like to talk more about what's needed for Arctic security. And of course, when we talk about Arctic security, as you well know, we're not just talking about security of our Arctic. We're talking about national security of all 40 million Canadians, and we're also talking about North American defense as well. And of course, when Canadians look at a map, they know the Arctic's ours. They want it to stay that way, but we know increasingly there's interest from Russia and China that are coming into our territorial waters and seeing how we react and our capabilities and the like. So certainly the case has been made. We need to do more in the Arctic to ensure our sovereignty is protected. So where would you start there, and what is critical to you to see in the defense industrial policy in terms of those Arctic investments? What do you need to see to have confidence it's the right direction for what we need for continental defense?
So one of the initiatives that Arctic 360 has been pushing is actually the production of an inventory of all existing assets, the age and condition of those assets, and effectively to look at where those critical investments need to be made in telecommunications or transportation or energy. We know that the information exists out there, but it's not been, brought together in a concise single location, as well as actually the possibility of creating a system like a Sim City, for those that are older, like I am, where you can actually play with that and see what, if you build a fiber optic cable, what does that unlock? Well, it turns out you can't build a fiber optic cable without, sustainable, sufficient energy. So it shows you where those, opportunities exist, but it also shows you where those failures are. So we need to, and I do believe that the military to some extent is doing some of that assessment for its own needs, but the problem is that we're not doing it all together. We need the northern communities to be part of it. We need the industry to be part of it, universities to be part of it, so that we actually figure out, what to do, where to do it, and how much it's going to cost.
Thank you very much. And of course, Canada operates in continental defense through our NORAD agreement. And part of what we do, as you know, is surveillance and those over the horizon radar systems. And in a previous conversation with you, I was a bit shocked to learn that those systems take 15,000 liters of diesel per day. And of course, Canadians, I don't believe, are quite aware of the reliance on diesel for our northern communities. That pipeline infrastructure, the grid infrastructure is just not the same in the Arctic. So you've talked about energy a lot, and I know that you have been a proponent for MMRs and SMRs, so small modular nuclear reactors. Can you tell the committee why that is?
So when I took a look at, sort of the various energy solutions, what we have learned through quite a number of different independent studies is that for a full energy solution, for the most part, wind and or solar won't get us there. Much of the Arctic geological situation, thermal power is not an option. Where there are rivers or large lakes, hydro may be an option, but again, the challenge is that while the Arctic is melting, at the same time, we're actually seeing less and less precipitation. So it's a weird sort of situation where two truths can actually exist at the same time. So the cities of Whitehorse and the cities of Yellowknife have actually had hydro dams that now requires a diesel backup. So that leaves us very few options. MMRs, micro modular reactors, which are in development. It's like old technology that is actually now being repurposed with the possibility of a civilian or commercial use, would actually provide clean energy options. We're seeing the industry out there producing everything from a 1 megawatt, 5 megawatts, 20 megawatts, 50 megawatts, sort of size solutions. It's not the Darlington, which is 500 megawatts, but, again, they're being produced as like batteries. So if you need 10, you might get 2 5s. I think we're going to see probably only about 3 to 5 companies moving forward with real solutions.
So if we want to expand our operations militarily in the north, then we need better energy, and you've made the argument that certainly we should be looking at nuclear then.
Absolutely. We're not going to achieve our clean energy solutions, especially in rural, remote northern Canada, without it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Mr. Baines, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you again for our expert witnesses for coming and joining us today. Very insightful commentary we're hearing, great interventions here. I'd like to we've heard a lot about our capacity, and I want to thank Mr. Iyer for shedding some light on what's happening in Alberta. And my hometown, Richmond, British Columbia, it's a powerhouse in aerospace, geospatial intelligence. We have, of course, in British Columbia, we have the shipbuilding that's taking place. Joint supply ships are coming online. We've seen oceanographic vessels. And maybe if I can go first to Ms. Redfern, and you talked a lot about the Arctic capacity and the technological advances maybe of the ships or the technology that's available there not working in the Arctic or to some degree. Like, I've had an opportunity to really see the progress of the shipbuilding, and of course with Boeing situated in my riding, we've seen the Poseidon aircraft and the capabilities that it has in the Arctic. So there's been a lot of talk about Arctic capabilities and technology. So maybe if you can shed some light on what your thoughts are on those procurement initiatives.
So what I can say is that my cousin Curtis Yuziak, who owns Arctic AUV, has developed local capacity in this sector, but struggles to actually get either the government procurements or the partnerships that would actually ensure long-term sustainable initiatives in the region. The challenge is, in some cases, is, you know, being a northern or indigenous company competing with the really large companies in the south that sometimes do or do not want to partner, or partner in a way that actually ensures that we're not just simply being used as I said earlier, a token. But their opportunities do exist, but it does take time to develop those business relationships for those southern companies to understand that it's going to take time to build our capacity, but we know that our people are interested in and truly want to have those partnerships.
And thank you for that. And I will add, like I had the opportunity. Vancouver Island's another example, and there's many Indigenous companies there that are supplying our submarine fabrication manufacturing. So maybe I'll shift to maybe Mr. Iyer and take the topic to. I know that he mentioned a lot about Alberta and the capacity once again. And I want to maybe look at like some things, other areas like niche markets that Canada could be positioned for in microwave, optical devices space as it relates to the defense technology sector. Again, like I said, we have a tremendous amount of a tech ecosystem in British Columbia. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity there.
Absolutely. The whole point I was trying to get across in my opening remarks is that Canada, it's exactly what you're saying, completely aligned with what you're saying. We have intense regional expertise in so many different areas. British Columbia, as you mentioned, is a hub for aerospace, but also maritime, also AI and quantum. We need to be able to leverage these regional strengths. The universities are at the center of those conversations. In response to the previous question, the universities are looking ahead at next generation threats. They're looking at what the local economies can provide, the local industry can provide. They're propping up small businesses. Universities have infrastructure that these businesses can access. Universities have mechanisms to accelerate the activities of these small businesses, connect them to the CAF, connect them to DRDC. It's essentially what we normally do on an everyday basis. So UBC is a perfect example in BC. UBC Okanagan is an excellent example. You mentioned microwave. They have strengths in microwave. We have strengths in microwave. Toronto has strengths in microwave. It's important for us to allocate, to decide our roles in the broader sort of defense technology innovation ecosystem and really push hard on our regional strengths.
Thank you for that. And of course, once again, I want to shamelessly plug BCIT, British Columbia Institute of Technology in Richmond also is another great example of some of the training that takes place in the aerospace. And maybe if I can
Mr. Baines,
talk about,
unfortunately, we're out of time. I let you get your plug in, but I can't let you plug twice. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Redfern, climate change is impacting the North. It has a great impact on your region and your people. Could you talk to us about the issues from your point of view and also touch on defense? Thank you.
So I can tell you that in the human-built environment, so our communities, what we're seeing is also happening out on the land is there is melting permafrost. It does mean that almost every new sort of infrastructure that is built could and should actually address that inherent risk. Otherwise, when I was mayor, I remember saying that we have billions of dollars of infrastructure that is at risk because it's not melting uniformly. And so there is innovation that has been used and deployed. I can tell you for, underneath the tarmac of the Iqaluit runway, there are insulation panels, as well as the big new buildings, mostly the Government of Canada or the Government of Nunavut, where there are poles that are put into the ground near the building that actually try to moderate the temperature to reduce that. But where we were also missing opportunities, because the city of Iqaluit has buried its water and sewage pipes in what we thought was the permafrost, like concrete. Problem is that as the permafrost melts, what was happening continuously is that they were breaking. If we had put, sensors on those pipes and what they were called as flexible couplers on the joints that allowed, the pipes, to not break. The challenge is actually getting any money from the different levels of government to help, mitigate those risks. As it relates to the military, all that critical infrastructure that needs to be built needs to be climate change proofed. And we need to make sure that, what we often saw is that the extra 10% in an infrastructure project to climate change proof was well worth its investment.
Merci beaucoup, Nakourmik.
Thank you very much.
Okay, merci, Mr. Saint-Marie. Colleagues, thank you very much. I'd like to take the opportunity again to thank the witnesses for availing themselves to the committee. Lots of interesting insight from a variety of different ranges of perspective. So thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm going to dismiss the witnesses, but just before you go, members, we've got just one small order of business. The clerk had sent around numbers on the forecasted budgets for our studies. Just a quick note, you may have looked at some of those numbers and raised an eyebrow as I did, but it's important to note that these are estimates in the event that we were to have witnesses coming from all regions of the country with the estimated costs associated. To be clear, these are not confirmed witnesses. This is in the event that. So should we feel we need a further conversation to get into the depths of details around this, we can create an opportunity for us to do so. But I first wanted to present the budget to the committee so that if there was unanimous consent, we could move forward. I'm seeing yes from the Bloc, yes from the Conservatives. I'm seeing no opposition from the Liberal side. I'll consider that adopted. Again, not what we're going to spend, simply the ceiling we're creating for ourselves. Colleagues, very productive meeting. Thank you very much. We'll see you again soon. Meeting adjourned.
you.